One man, three brides. A tale of bigamy and murder in a country at war. Our moment in crime is the case of George Joseph Smith and the brides in the bath. Had it not been for the keen eyes of two seemingly unconnected men, then George Joseph Smith may have gotten away with murder. Charles Burnham had never believed that his daughter Alice drowned accidentally. Upon reading the news of the world one day in January 1915, his feelings about Alice's death became stronger. He had come across an article about the drowning death of Margaret Lofty. Concerned about the similarities in both deaths, Charles sent the article to the police, along with another article about his daughter's death. It was at this same time that Joseph Crossley, whose wife had once given Alice and her husband lodgings, also noticed the similarities in the drownings. Just like Charles, he sent the articles to the police. After the police received the articles, Detective Inspector Arthur Fowler Neal was assigned to the case. It was D.I. Neal who learned of another similar drowning, that of Bessie Mundy. Not only was D.I. Neal shocked by how similar the deaths were, but he noted that the descriptions of each woman's husbands, Henry Williams, George Smith and John Lloyd, were the same. Inspector Neal was about to uncover a story of bigamy and murder. George Joseph Smith was born on the 11th of January 1872 in Bethnal Green, London. From the age of 9 onwards, he regularly served time for theft. Smith spent time in the army, serving overseas in the 1890s. Upon his return to England in 1896, Smith began using various aliases and romanced several women, who he would convince to steal for him. Smith would then sell the stolen goods, living off the proceeds. When this plan resulted in Smith serving more time in jail, he began planning to con wealthy women. But in order to get his hands on the money, Smith would have to turn to murder. In England in 1910, many women were finding it hard to attract a husband. With boys more likely to die in infancy and many young men immigrating to the colonies, women were outnumbering men in England by over 500,000. Bessie Mundy was one of these women. At 33 years old, she was considered to be a spinster, so it came as no surprise when she accepted the proposal of Smith, who was using the alias of Henry Williams, whom she met in August 1910. They married that same year. Knowing that Bessie had an inheritance worth £2,500 gave Smith a reason to propose. It was only after the pair married that Smith learned that Bessie's money was under the control of her uncle, and that her weekly allowance was only worth £8. Smith did what he could to gain control of his wife's money, from issuing threats and employing a solicitor. When he only received £138, Smith decided to find a way out of the marriage. He accused Bessie of having an affair and infecting him with a venereal disease. He then abandoned Bessie. Devastated, Bessie moved to Weston-super-Mare. It was in this town that she would run into her estranged husband in March 1912. Smith begged Bessie for forgiveness and she gladly took him back. But once again, Smith had a plan, and this time it was a deadly one. Smith arranged for a £150 loan to be made against Bessie's inheritance. The couple then moved to Herne Bay and had wills made out in favour of each other. Smith continued with his murderous plan by visiting an ironmonger's, where he purchased an iron bath. The 10th of July saw Bessie pay a visit to Dr. French. She was accompanied by her husband, who insisted that Bessie had had a fit. Bessie, however, could not remember having one. Dr. French was called to the lodgings of the couple a few days later. Smith claimed again that Bessie had had a fit. Bessie was then encouraged by Smith to write to her uncle to inform him of the fits, and that she'd had a will made out to her husband. Smith posted the letter himself. On the 13th of July, Smith drew a bath for his wife. A short time later, a note was sent to Dr. French. The note was from Smith, who asked the doctor to visit his lodgings as he feared his wife had died. At the couple's lodgings, Dr. French found Bessie in the bathtub, her head submerged. Bessie could not be revived. As it appeared that Bessie had experienced a fit and drowned, a verdict of accidental death was recorded. Smith wanted to get his hands on Bessie's money as quickly as possible. He had Bessie buried in a cheap coffin in a communal grave. Smith even returned the bath Bessie had died in to the ironmongers. Bessie's family did what they could to stop Smith from inheriting her estate, but in the end Smith received his wife's money due to her will. 26-year-old Alice Burnham was unlucky enough to meet Smith, who was currently using his real name, in October 1913. Alice's father, Charles Burnham, had serious doubts about Smith's intentions, as he was holding £100 in savings for his daughter. Alice, however, was enamoured with Smith, and the pair eloped to Portsmouth, where they married on the 4th of November 1913. From there the couple travelled to Blackpool, where on the 10th of December they rented rooms from a Mrs. Crosley. The rooms contained a bath, something that Smith had specifically sought out. Alice's father was forced to hand over his daughter's money after Smith threatened him with legal action. Smith also made sure to take out a life insurance policy on Alice worth £500. All Smith had to do now was proceed with the murder. He informed Mrs. Crosley that his wife suffered from headaches and asked if she could recommend a doctor. Smith was referred to Dr. Billings, who examined Alice and found her to be in good health apart from a slight heart murmur. That evening, Smith asked Mrs. Crosley to draw a bath for Alice. A couple of hours later, Mrs. Crosley noticed that water was dripping through the kitchen ceiling. It was at that point that Smith entered the room, carrying a box of eggs which he claimed to have just bought for his and Alice's breakfast. When Mrs. Crosley pointed out the water stain, Smith checked on his wife. Alice was unresponsive in the bath, and Dr. Billings was called. Dr. Billings was unable to revive Alice, and he advised the coroner to record the death as accidental, noting that Alice had suffered a heart attack while in the bath. Smith wasted no time in claiming the insurance money payable on his wife's death. He wrote to the insurance company that same night. Smith met his final victim, Margaret Lofty, aged 38, just 3 months later. Using the name John Lloyd, Smith married Margaret on the 17th of December 1914. It didn't take long for Smith to take out a £700 life insurance policy on his wife with the Yorkshire Insurance Company. The couple rented rooms at a boarding house run by a Mrs. Blatch in Highgate. Smith took his wife to a local doctor, Dr. Bates, the same day. Smith mentioned that Margaret might be suffering from fits, but the doctor only prescribed Margaret a mild sedative. That evening, Mrs. Blatch ran Margaret a bath. Smith soon reported to the landlady that he had found his wife unresponsive. Dr. Bates was called and he concluded that Margaret had drowned. A funeral was quickly arranged and Smith began the process of collecting the insurance money. Smith, however, was unaware that the deaths of his wives were being investigated. Detective Inspector Neal managed to track down the 3 tubs the women had died in, and he concluded that it was impossible for the women to drown in the small tubs. Upon discovering that each woman had had a life insurance policy, D.I. Neal contacted those that had insured the latest victim, the Yorkshire Insurance Company. D.I. Neal asked them to expedite payment to the London office of Smith's lawyer, W.T. Davies. Police were then posted outside of the office to wait for Smith's arrival. D.I. Neal finally encountered Smith outside the office on the 1st of February 1915. As Smith's only legal marriage took place in 1898, he was charged with bigamy and he admitted to using various aliases. Exhumation orders for the bodies of each bride were given, and the famous pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury became involved in the case. Spilsbury determined that the 3 women had drowned, but because there were no signs of violence, it seemed that Smith would get away with murder. Both Spilsbury and Neal were determined to prove that Smith killed his wives. The pair reenacted each bathtub scene, using women who were physically similar to each wife. Using the very tubs the brides had died in, they discovered that if the women were grabbed by the legs and pulled forward, then the women's heads immediately became submerged, causing a loss of consciousness. This was how Smith had murdered his wives. Smith's trial began on the 22nd of June 1915 at the Old Bailey in London. Neal demonstrated at the trial exactly how Smith had killed his wives. Smith's love of marrying women for their money was also revealed, with many women coming forward to say that they had been abandoned by Smith once he had gotten his hands on their money. The trial was a sensation, with the courtroom packed each day and crowds of people gathering outside the Old Bailey. It took the jury less than 30 minutes to find Smith guilty. On the 13th of August 1915, Smith was hanged at Maidstone Prison. He went to his death claiming his innocence. Thank you for watching the very first episode of One Moment in Crime. Look out for the second episode next Thursday.